Hi Chris, it's James at Reedish Motorsport. We're just starting the RACP video now, so this is the check and report of the rear axle carrier panel, which is a large panel underneath the car where the subframe bolts up into. And on the E46 it's a weak element, I'm afraid, and it's known that it can have cracks and spot weld issues and things like that. So we're going to be inspecting that area and seeing if there's any problems on the car now or likely to happen in the future. But first of all, we need to clean some of this dirt off, because this is just natural road grime and sort of grease from the drive shafts, and all cars get that. So we need to clean through this grease and dirt and then inspect the panel a little bit closer, specifically around this left rear mounting point. So now we've cleaned a patch of dirt off of the underside, we can get a good look at the rear axle carrier panel, which is really in good condition. You know, there's not much corrosion on there, is there? That's nice, still quite very fresh. You can see some bubbles occurring down at the bottom in the middle of the picture when it comes into focus again. Just focusing up. Yeah, there's some bubbles there which are corrosion bubbles, where there is some movement of metal or stress of metal, but not actually any cracks yet in that location. But that's because this is a later model. This is a January 05 build, and after October 04 BMW changed the RACP very slightly. Inside here, where they commonly used to split, because it's a hollow box section, they've put a very clever plastic solid piece of sort of plastic inside, which strengthens that box section and turns it from a hollow to a strong structure, which is why you don't get any cracks in that side, or very rarely do you get any cracks in that side after October 04 cars. But sometimes you do still see spot welds that have broken or splitting or breaking or flexing, and we've got one here on the side of the panel where the RACP is spot welded to the wheel arch panel. So that shows there is some movement on that side there. And there was also very early signs of spot weld movement up on the very top of the RACP, breaking through the seam sealer in two locations. Just going to put my hand to point there. There's one very small crack noticed just there in the seam sealer around the side of a spot weld, and there's another one just starting around about here, which is where two common spot welds are, which are very poor on all E46s regardless of age. And that shows that there is very early signs of panel movement, and also looks to be a spot weld possibly breaking just behind this heat shield, or maybe corrosion contact. You see two spot welds and a third one in the distance there, and there is some corrosion building up there which might have a little circular arc to it. So I think that's early signs of the last final fourth spot weld trying to break in that area there. But even though we don't have a crack on this left side rear, because BMW reinforced it, we do have a crack on the right rear. So there's the right rear subframe mount, and again it's got the general sort of dirt and grime underneath it from just years worth of road sort of grime flying up at the underside. And in this location up here, we haven't cleaned it yet, just to show you that it's there underneath the dirt, and you can see it. There is a crack in that panel, which is shown by that rusty sort of black line, which is just to the left of my finger now, going in a diagonal, sort of a lightning bolt sort of shape. So there is one crack on the right rear, and also we've had a good look at the front mount. That is quite harder to access and also get a camera in to inspect, but I'll do my best to try and get the camera in there, because there is a crack on the right front as well. Now it's harder to see because it's hidden behind lots of components, so I need to just focus the camera first, and then I need to move that handbrake cable out of the way. And there's the crack on the sort of at the bottom of the screen now, going towards sort of 10 o'clock on a clock face. Almost disguised now. You can see the top of the crack still, and now we move the handbrake cable out of the way and you can see the crack is there. It's coming from the top of that bush. So the fact that it's quite visible, it's going up the vertical face, means that it's also got quite a crack going on the horizontal face, which we can't see because the bush is very close to the underside of the body. But there is definitely some cracks on the offside front mount as well, and our knowledge tells us as well that there will be on the left front bush as well, which is completely hidden by a heat shield as well. But there definitely are some issues on the RACP, I'm afraid to say. Nothing horrendous, it's still in a good shape in its original condition, and they only seem to be hairline cracks rather than any massive splits. But we also are going to look inside the car now as well. We want to check the spot welds, like there's a spot weld there, there's another one there. We want to check these two, but on the other side of the panel, and that's done from inside the car, going through a hidden cavity in underneath the boot floor, because sometimes they can have little cracks within them. And we're also then going to check underneath the rear seats. We're going to have a look at the very top sections of these mounts, because we've got cracks underneath. We're also going to look inside the car to see if there's any cracks on the top section, which is hidden a little bit higher up underneath the rear seat panel. We're now in the boot of the car, and we've taken out the cardboard boot floor, the carpet, and also the sound deadening pads, and we'll go into the rear seat section a little bit later on. But we're now going to look underneath the boot floor panel in these BMW grommet locations. So you see there's various grommets here that we've taken out, and that allows us to then inspect those cavities with this item, which is a borescope camera, and that shows an image on the screen of the laptop, and we can then see if there's any problems or any issues that we need to be aware of inside the car. So first of all, I'll start on the right hand side. The right hand side is all good, and I'm just going to show you what an example of a good spot weld looks like. So there's one spot weld just here, and that's good because it's not got any cracks, not got any rust, not got any black lines, and it's the same color inside to the outside, so that's completely normal. And then if we go into the same spot weld area, but on the left hand side of the panel, we can see we've got an issue with this one. It's cracked because we've got lots of rust that's coming out of it, not only in the area but also landing on the panel beneath it. But there's two crack lines, jagged lines going down that way, and also you can't really see it very easy, but there's a dark brown, a black shadow around it, which is the start of a crack going around it. So it's already cracked completely and dead-ended itself by coming off the edge of the panel, which goes along that way there. So it's not likely to get any worse, that one, but it does tell us that that's now separated. So there's 3 layers of metal which that spot weld was holding together. There's the RACP just in the top left here, there's the cavity cover panel, which is all this here, and then there's the rib, which is this piece here, and it means that at least one of those is now disconnected from the other. I'd imagine the rib is now disconnected from the cavity cover panel and the RACP, so that one could have some attention and do with being worked on. And as you can see, that's completely not visible in the boot, and it's not visible underneath the car. That's in the closed hidden cavities of the RACP, and lots of people don't realize that, or to be fair, even other companies, they would just look at the cracks underneath the car, reinforce or plate the underneath of the car, but all these internal sections that would be damaged would be left, and that isn't a good thing to do. So it's better that this knowledge is passed on so that you can see where you may need to carry out some work as well. And in the other areas, this grommet here going through, there's a lower panel edge where the cavity cover panel, which is this piece, is spot welded to the RACP, which is this panel here. And there's a spot weld there, another one there, and there's a line of them where this panel joins together with the other panel. These are the two underneath the car that I talked about that we wanted to inspect. This one here is okay and normal and good because it's the same color, there's no black lines, there's no rust, nothing like that. But the one on the right of it is starting to crack because we can see it's got a black line coming around the side of the spot weld, not completely all the way around the spot weld, but down the side of the spot weld, and it's now coming out of the spot weld by about 2 millimeters. The spot weld carries on around that bit there, but the crack carries on in that direction, so the crack is trying to travel over to this one here. So that is also the start of a crack and a spot weld failure down in that lower section as well, which is quite hard to access because it's underneath the boot floor panel. It's obviously quite a lot of work to get to that item, but it's much better that it's done in one go and you know about it rather than it be missed. So the next area we're going to go to is inside the car, and for that we have to take out the carpet, the rear seats, the carpet across the rear axle carry panel I should say, also the rear seats, and we're looking underneath the rear seat panel. So this is where the rear passengers would sit, the bench seat here, and then the seat uprights here. And we take off 2 brackets that are redundant on the coupe. These brackets are just for the touring and saloon models where the seats clip in, that are not needed at all on a coupe model, because the coupe has this one here where the seats clip in. And then we drill a 20mm access hole in the seat panel so that we can inspect and put a bore scope camera in through this area. And we paint the area black so that it won't ever rust and there won't be any corrosion problems. And then we put 2 new BMW grommets, 20mm, in this location to close off the panel and make sure it's watertight still. So we don't actually need to use the bore scope camera because we can see the MIG welds quite easily. We know where to drill and we go directly above the MIG welds. So I can zoom in now, and this is a little MIG weld covered by my finger now, and then now visible. And there are some black odd lines around there, and there is also one black line coming out of the top of it going towards sort of 1 o'clock on a clock face, just up here, which is the start of a crack, I'm afraid to say. And that black material around it is the same sort of black stuff that we were seeing in the video before when we were looking at the rear internal sections. So that is a crack developing on this passenger side. And there's another MIG weld over there, but that one looks a bit better because you see it's the same colour as the panel around it. Also, we're going to have a look on the other side now, the driver's side, and this one's a little bit more obvious. The MIG welds are better and more penetrated, but the cracks are even more clear. These are hairline cracks, so they're very thin and small. Just trying to get a focus on the there we go. So you can see the MIG weld is covered by my finger about now, and now visible, and the crack is down the right hand side of that and going off the bottom of the picture now. And then the crack goes across the MIG weld that way a little bit, and then also goes at the top of the MIG weld and goes quite some distance actually, and it's sort of heading over towards the other edge of the panel at the back there. So this area definitely needs cutting open to access the cracks and try and well, stop them and then re-weld them and then reinforce that area. You can see there's another crack over there coming from the other MIG weld, and it's trying to meet together. There's a little bit of a gap where they haven't yet met, but they will meet together soon, and then that panel area will be even weaker. So just looking in that side there, let's try and get a picture of that one. That's going directly through the MIG weld and also coming down the left hand side of it off the screen now. So yeah, there definitely are some noticeable cracks on this this mount here, which is on the driver's side, and you can see how far away and how small it is because I'm now sort of in the middle of the car, and there are quite small little items down in here, but they are definitely present, and that does require quite a bit of work to do the internals. The underside's quite, I say, straightforward. I mean, we've been doing them since 2011. We've done about 190 M3s now with this specific repair. All successful. None of them have ever returned with any other problems, so that's good news. But the inside is quite more challenging. So the underside we've got a complete price and package for, but the internal sections are a little bit more tricky. They're we charge an extra 6 hours to do the inside front of the front pair. I mean, is that one there and that one there. That's what we call the rear pair over there, but the front pair here we charge 6 hours because we need to do a lot of the car, strip the car down completely inside. So that's door cards off, carpets out, sound deadening out, leather, backrest, the rear seats have to come out again, the boot carpets, the headrests, and all of the glass and the headlining has to be really well protected with and also the front of the car has to be partitioned off with a big sort of bulkhead that we've got made especially for the E46. And that's because what we're doing inside the car to resolve that issue is cutting, grinding, welding, painting, spraying and waxing. All those things are very risky inside a closed space because we can't get any damage on any of the leather or the glass or anything like that. When you're doing all that work underneath the car, all those processes just sort of fall to the ground naturally, and then we can sweep them up after. But when we're doing, if you can imagine cutting with sparks inside a car, welding inside a car, and then also painting inside a car, like spraying, it's quite a challenge, and that's why we have to make sure the car is so well prepared. It takes well over 2 hours to protect the car and strip it, another couple of hours to do the repair, and then about another couple of hours to rebuild the car inside. So we charge 6 hours labour to do the inside fronts. What you've got at risk on the back left is probably solvable by actually working underneath the car and going that way before we put the reinforcement plate on. This is obviously, I'm assuming that we were to do the repair, but obviously sorry about that. I mean, you might not be intending to do the repair, or you might want another company to do the repair, what I should say. But the two problems with the spot welds in that one there and that one there are probably solvable, doable whilst the car is being in a strip state from underneath the car, which would save quite a lot of time and money, because then it would mean that we wouldn't have to cut out a hole in the boot floor section, which nobody really wants if they can avoid it. So we've got a tried and tested process where we can attack those two from underneath the car. But the internal cracks here, there are so many cracks and they are quite long and large, we can't do anything from underneath the car. We have to cut a section of the seat panel out of the car on both sides to solve that problem. So yeah, that's the update on the RACP. So we've looked at the underside, seen the cracks there, looked in the back internals, seen some spot weld breakages there, and looked at the front section and seen quite a few cracks on the inside front section there. So hopefully that's informative for you and gives you a good heads up on what we've found. And if you've got any questions on the process, or would you like any costs for those and things like that, let us know and we'll be happy to help you. Also, just having a final look round inside, because we commonly have to check other areas that we've seen over the years that can be problematic, and I think I've just noticed one more crack as well, which I wanted to show you. So I've looked down the side here, and you see this seam sealer here, that's holding or sealing the panel, the seat panel, to the chassis leg inside, and this side looks okay at the moment, but on this side what alerted me was this corrosion or this rust here, which is in a line, and it's the same typical sort of black line with a little bit of rust in it that we saw in the internal cavities in here and also in the back. And there are some spot welds down this side, and it is a weak point. This seat weld, sorry, the seat panel is spot welded to the chassis leg. You can see that there's a spot weld indentation underneath the seam sealer here. It's just a little circle, and there is another one at the top here, but it's very hard to see, and it hasn't yet broken through the seam sealer, but I think there is a crack coming out of that edge of the spot weld underneath the sealer. So the sealer would need to be removed as well down this side, and investigate, and if there is a crack there, stop drill it, drill out the spot welds, replace them with plug welds, and then reseal and paint the edges of the seat panel. We'd probably do that on both sides, I'd recommend, because if it is a definite crack over there, then it's likely a weakened area, and we wouldn't want to leave anything weakened either side, so we'd probably look at both sides as well. So now we're going to start the video for the comprehensive vehicle inspection, which is where we look at the underside and mechanical items of the vehicle and inspect them thoroughly for any problems currently, or anything that's likely to come up in the future, just to give you a heads up. And that gets reported to you on a report which we call the advisory report, and then we like to video it as well, so that you can watch the items rather than just read them from a list. You can look at them now on this video. So the top item is at the front of the car. Front brake flexi hose is split and cracked. There's some small hairline cracks starting just here in the brake flexi pipes, which get more when the wheels are turned left and right. The front xenon drop link is broken and cable tied in place, which is this item here. The engine oil, there's an engine oil leak around the front of the engine, likely the timing chain tensioner sealing ring. So looking up at the engine, we've taken off the under tray already so we can see the bottom of the engine better, and there's an oil leak. It's only very small, it's more of a mist really, it doesn't seem to be actually leaking onto anything yet, although saying that, there is what looks to be a little collection of engine oil just there. We probably need to investigate that further, but it does look more likely from the timing chain area. The engine constant pressure valve is missed in oil, so that's noticed up at the back of the engine. The engine is mostly dry at the rear, but up in the distance there's a wet patch which is coming from the constant pressure valve. And then the power steering high pressure pipe is leaking fluid, but that's also quite small amount. Here's the power steering high pressure pipe, and there's a sweat of oil here, which is just early signs of a little bit of a leak from that area. The steering gaiters are secured with cable ties. Here is cable tie there and there, and there and there, whereas they should have metal clamps. The exhaust centre nuts are corroded. These ones should be 13mm nuts, but there's not much left of them, so new ones one day would be required, and the bolts for the rear. There's signs of replacement seal section fitted at the near side front. So when we look at the underside of the chassis, you can see it's all original sort of BMW seam sealer and undercoat. And then you get down here and there's a corrosion and filler and also non-genuine sealer going down this side, and that's where it looks to have had a seal section replaced, which is this small little panel here. Original style rear trailing arm bushes still fitted, and signs of separation and carrier contact. So these are the rear trailing arm bushes, and the rubber should be bonded very tightly to the aluminium, but you can simply move it quite easily. And there's a black shadow line against the console where it's been making contact. Those bushes have been coming into contact and making that black mark, which they shouldn't ever contact that. That just shows that they're separating. Well, actually this one's pulled out because you can see the silver marks on the inside sleeve, and the trailing arm is more over to the right hand side. There's a smaller gap there than there is over here, and it should be central. So the trailing arm bushes have definitely separated. That will give you a little bit of an unstable feeling at the higher speeds, sort of dual carriageways and the motorways. So changing those will definitely improve stability at higher speeds. The rear metal brake pipes are corroded. You can see there's corrosion starting on the corners of those brake pipes. The fuel filter under tray is insecure. That's this item here. There's a fixing missing there, just making it drop down a little bit. The drive shaft exhaust heat shield is insecure. That's this one here, which is fixed to the exhaust, and you can see I can lift it because there's a stud missing here. There's one fitted over here and one in the back, but one missing over here, so the plate is insecure. Might be given a rattle possibly. The left rear aquaplane guard is insecure. That's this item here, which is missing a fixing in that location there, and that top fixing isn't fully seated. Slight wear in both inner drive shaft CV joints. So on the rear drive shafts, here's one drive shaft, and they've got an inner and an outer CV joint, and there's slight play in here, which we can feel when we do a wheel shake. You can see how much the wheel moves, but very little, and you can actually, I'm still moving the wheel. There is play in that inner drive shaft joint there, and also that left-hand side one. Only a small amount though. Non-genuine rear springs fitted. That's the rear suspension springs. They're not BMW ones, but they're obviously doing their job okay. They're quite common to snap, the BMW ones, so that's probably why it's got replacement springs fitted. Subframe bushes starting to show signs of separation. You see some cracks where the rubber is sort of separating up here around the edge of the subframe bushes, but they're still serviceable and they'll go on for a number of years yet, I'd imagine. Rear top mount starting to separate. That's at the rear shock absorber at the top. There's a black gap where the rubber used to be, and that's what we call separating, where it's come away very slightly. Rear exhaust clamps mostly missing. So the rear silencer is clamped to the centre section with clamps which go this way, and there's a little bit left here, but nothing up here or here, and nothing at all on this side. Well, you could argue there's a tiny bit up there, but it's certainly not doing anything. And you can see where gas and condensation has been dribbling out of it because that's stains here. So it might be blowing a little bit, It's not amazingly, not that much, but it's certainly something to get fixed, I think, or consider sooner rather than later. The offside exhaust rubber is broken, so on the rear exhaust silencer, the offside or the right hand side rubber here is broken. You see that gap there where it should be bonded or fixed to that point up in the distance. The rubber is split. Both rear drop link rubbers are cracked, which is the anti-roll bar drop link rubbers, these ones here. And both drive shaft reluctor rings showing signs of contact with the ABS wheel speed sensor. These ones are a little bit harder to see, but on the ends of the drive shaft there are these things called ABS rings or reluctor rings, and they should hover about 1 millimeter away from that sensor up there, which is called the ABS sensor. And we can see that there is some contact, early contact with the ABS sensor, because in certain areas you can see scratch lines on these on this ring. There's a position now where we can see some scratches, and then in certain areas it goes away completely where it's not been making contact. So if there's not any issues with the ABS lights or warning, there you go, there's some really clear scratches just there. And that's due to corrosion being formed or growing underneath the rings, and then they're just pushing the rings outwards, so they're expanding, and therefore then it's coming into contact with the sensor. I'd only worry about that one, I think, if you start seeing ABS warning lights on the dashboard in the future and things like that. So that's the end of the comprehensive vehicle inspection, and now what we're just going to quickly show is the corrosion points underneath the chassis. It's part of one of the service items and also included in the report, so lots of people would like to know what the chassis is like, because if they plan on keeping the car for a while, that's the area that normally needs most attention, because other things that are rusty, like a diff or an axle or a trailing arm, can be bolted off and put back on again or renewed for a new one, whereas the chassis is the car, so that can't be changed very easily. So we just need to make a record of those, and also that helps us if we ever get asked to price any jobs on the vehicle in the future. We can refer to this video and we can advise correct costings without having to inspect the car all over again. So the corrosion points to be considered are the battery box bracket, which is at the rear right of the car. This is the battery box, and there's the bracket on it, which is suffering with corrosion. The rear shock absorber turrets, which are up on the top of the wheel arch up there, are quite rusty. The rear wheel arch 20mm grommets are lightly corroded beneath the seam sealer. Now that's a lot harder to see, those ones, especially with the wheels fitted, but it's basically up in the wheel arch behind some of that mud contact. It's a very common area on the E46, almost sometimes you could say guaranteed, which is a real shame. But it's already had some work in this area, because you can see there's a non-genuine sealer swipe up this location here, whereas BMW had more of a stippled sort of textured effect. So this area, this one's a little bit more original, I'd say, but it's possibly common that some of those arches can be corroded once the mud is taken off of them. The rear spring perches, which are a little bit hidden, but you can see them just inside those springs. Those perches are corroded. The fuel tank and brake pipe brackets, these ones wouldn't just simply come off. They'd need to be taken off of the chassis and then worked on a bench or aquablasted and then re-welded back to the chassis, because those ones are quite corroded, and that's what's holding the fuel tank up. There's another brake pipe bracket there, and that one's not so bad, that fuel tank bracket, but it's still suffering with corrosion on the outsides. Then the forward fuel tank bracket area, including the brackets. So here's the other brackets for the fuel tank. Those ones are quite poor. And there's another one in here, but it's quite hard to see. So that area we call the fuel tank area, which is hidden by the under trays and the exhaust and the heat shields at the moment. The rear trailing arm pockets, which is where the rear trailing arms bolt up to. So there's corrosion all the way around the backs of those, where that console and cradle is bolted in, and that's on both sides. The rear jacking points and the V-brace mounting point. So this is the V-brace and this is the V-brace mounting point. and this is the jacking point where the jacking pad is. So there's corrosion starting to push and break through the seam sealer. And if it's breaking through the seam sealer, it's probably quite established inside, because it takes quite a bit of growth to push through seam sealer. And what the rule of thumb is normally is that if you can see corrosion, then that's about 10% of what you can see. The rest of it is hidden and sort of between the metal layers or beneath the seam sealer. So those areas there are probably going to be quite extensive once it was opened up. You can see on the outside of the jacking point it's got some seam sealer, and I think unless it's a shadow, I think that's actually a hole. It is a hole. You do unfortunately have a hole in the sill already, so that shows you how much the corrosion is around that jacking point, and will just get worse. And it does appear that the jacking point has sort of sunk into the floor, not during our work, but just naturally over the years of people jacking it up. It seems to have been weakened due to the seals being corroded. So bear that one in mind. That might be something that you'd like to consider getting done in the future, just to make sure you don't sort of suffer an MOT failure one day when that hole becomes, it's very small at the moment, but when it becomes a lot bigger in years to come. Then we've got the central grommet holes have lightly corrosion underneath them. That's these things here. They're really weird because it's a massive corrosion point normally, and even though it's just a rubber grommet covering a hole, you can see that there's corrosion staining around it, which is that orange colour, and that tells us that there will be likely to be corrosion in there. Maybe not so much that side, but it's an area that always needs a little bit of attention on the M3 chassis, on the 46s. Then we've got the central underside, including the chassis legs. Now from a distance it doesn't look very bad, and it isn't, to be honest. It's just early signs of corrosion starting on the ends of the chassis legs, and here, for example, it's starting to push away the seam sealer, and just small, very small pieces which aren't much to worry about now, but if you do plan to keep the car for a long time, then these are things to sort of do sooner rather than later, rather than let it grow. On the left hand side, there is obviously that seal section to be considered, because there's obviously a lot of corrosion in that area, because I'm afraid to say it hasn't been protected very well. The basic swipe of seam sealer that you're seeing here just hasn't been good enough really to keep corrosion at bay. So the front jacking point is quite affected with corrosion, and so is that seal section. A lot of it's hidden by the seal cover, the side skirts, but once that was off, I think you'd be surprised how much is around that area. So that one would probably want some exploratory work just to understand how far the corrosion is around there. You can see it's developing on the lower section of the seal, which you might not see when the car's on the ground when your view is looking down, but now we're viewing looking up. You can see the corrosion which is underneath the seal section, which is probably due to a poor repair previously, which could be argued is obvious now. You can see the seam sealer that's not a BMW finish underneath the car on the left hand side seal. And that is about it in the central section. The last thing to note is just in the sort of engine bay, or the front chassis leg area. If you look at it from this side, like the wheel arch side, there is some corrosion appearing here, which isn't much, and it's certainly not structural, but it's just some things that can be taken care of just to keep the car in good order for years to come. So that's the end of the inspection and the video there. Hopefully you found that informative, and if we can help you with any questions you might have on our findings, then let us know, and we'll be happy to help you.